we're clipping ourselves. Great, that's agents. I want to invite, maybe, is anyone from Skillbyte still around who can invite them to the stage? That would be great. Or actually, if you can, oh yeah, Tom's there, that's great. So Gabe, I saw you smiling in the right places, and maybe happy because you haven't seen this film, or even, I don't think, been anywhere near it since quite early in the process, where we presented to you, I think it was a storyboard, maybe we had some rough scrawlings, and you gave us some very valuable feedback at that time. So how do you, can I get your first impressions of the film?
I absolutely love it, and I love how topical Maya's task is. That you don't realize that's one of the things that I got out of visiting Liquid City and yourself. You know that it influenced what we were talking about how where we want to go with generative AI.
Wow.
And so the other thing that I really enjoyed was watching the music agent rocking out on top of the LP player. So I don't think I ever saw that in the storyboards or anything like that. I mean, a lot of it was new, but I fixated on that because it's exactly how, for explanation of agents, was stored in my head. My music agent, that's for me. I can share that with others if I need to, but I don't have to. And it's just there when I need it. So I love that. And then, of course, the story is great. I mean, my skin crawled, a little bit with
Jonathan?
One's owner, Jonathan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in your typical fashion, I could see how there's this opportunity and there's a little bit of a danger zone that we have to be mindful of. I love it.
Well, I think that was, well, maybe this is a good chance, maybe Yimika, you could talk a little bit about, the first drafts that you did. I don't know if you can even remember back in the day, but I think one of those things is we were very interested about the idea of a conflict or some kind of different worldview of, having one agent that does everything for you and just provides this kind of convenience versus this more kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, like a federated model, like an ecosystem, a spirit world full of these distinct agents that might have different kind of personality. What was your first reaction to that, Yimika?
I think working on the story and everything was it's a bit of a challenge in a very good way, in trying to find a way to portray somebody who, although they really hold utility to a very high value. It's normal by anybody that there are people who would want everything in one agent, and then there are people who would want multiple things in multiple agents. I'm just trying to look into both of those things without being overly making one out to be too bad. Even the earlier drafts of Jonathan would have made, if he made your skin crawl now, earlier drafts were just absolutely abhorrent and unbearable. It was just after maybe 2 sentences, you'll be wondering why she's still sitting down. So it was a bit of a balance to just kind of, see these two types of people within this world, and just kind of looking at what a world like that would encompass. And it was a really fun thing to write. Earlier drafts, Kate even had to they had to down me back because it was okay, I was going too into sci-fi, and it was just okay, let's take it down to that was kind of that movie radio. Which ended up,
No, please go ahead.
Which resulted in this story, which I'm very proud of, and I think did a fantastic job with everything.
I think it's very interesting about this kind of relationship of science fiction and technology, because obviously I guess our hope is that by making films like this, people who are working on building that technology can take some inspiration from it, either for things that they do want to do or things that they don't want to do, but at least it gives you a bit more kind of tooling to be able to understand what the consequences might be or what kind of world you're trying to get to. But it was a good point, I think, because I think some of, when we started writing it, just like the world was so open and we had agents that were doing much more kind of emotional expression or doing things, and we wanted to bring it back and make it so that it does actually feel, if not completely possible now, possible very soon. We didn't want to do any complete flights of fancy, I guess, in that regard. So maybe actually it would be nice to throw it back to you, Gabe, and just ask, like, from your understanding, you have an illustrious career working in AI. How much of this film do you believe is kind of, how realistic do you think this is?
I think a lot of it is. I think the graphics, are compelling, and they don't need to be real humans, right? That we're rendering. The agents should be characteristic creatures like this. I think the shared aspect of it is going to be actually one of the trickier ones. Kind of a networking of me seeing your agents. You're aware of the dangers of when privacy isn't designed in from the beginning. So I think that part we're working on it, but we're also quite keen not to have something of mine accidentally visible to you. I think the user generated kind of aspect of it, having a writer be able to inch code. I would say a year and a half ago, I would have thought that was really sci-fi, and now with all the developments that have happened in generative AI, I think it's realistic. So I really can't point to something to say you were outlandish in any way. I think it is a question of appetite, for designing the interfaces to be friendly enough so that people can actually join the ecosystem, as opposed to just a one-off kind of demo. For someone to make this a part of their everyday kind of, their assistance, that's probably, acceptance is probably the bigger challenge.
I think it's funny that it feels like not even a year ago, 6 months ago, when I was drawing what the node-based thing was that she's making Glitchy out of. I was like, okay, we just make it look like complex enough that you can see that she's been working on it for a long time, but simple enough that you can believe that someone who's not a pro dev can plug these bits together and make this thing. But now it feels like you don't even bother with all that stuff. You just have another agent that you'd say, make this agent that does this thing. I don't know, it feels now like you might not even have to get your hands in this so much anymore. Suddenly the possibility is now there that you could speak Glitchy into being with another agent.
Yeah, but I think also having areas that are kind of surfaced as controls is part of what this ecosystem model is all about, because people want to retain some control in the different areas, and having this kind of sceneful design where you're able to actually get into bits and pull them out and do things in a more kind of intentional way is still probably valuable. I don't think it all needs to get thrown out.
Yeah, well, I guess that's all part of what we're, the Maya's world vision is about being able to have all of this choice and control, right? Being able to have different levels of granularity of control. So have a lot or a little, and you can make that choice.
Yeah. We're lucky enough to have Joe and Tom from Skillbad on the panel as well. Hey. I wonder if you want to say anything about the way that you approached the agents, giving them voices, because obviously Wall, who you also worked on, is a talking owl, but in the world of agents, not all of the agents talk, right? We only have some of them that talk. So how did you go about designing for that world?
Yeah, I mean, we were thinking a lot about how in films, and sci-fi in particular, there's this kind of tension where the audience expects to hear a sound for everything that happens. Like if someone's typing away at some sci-fi UI, you want to hear bleeps and bloops for literally everything. And it kind of feels empty or disappointing if you don't have that feedback for the audience. But then this is kind of like a product demo film. So we had to think realistically about what you would want to hear.
Possible they're muted?
Oh, sorry, am I muted?
No, I could hear you. I don't know. Is Tom coming through for everybody else?
For me, sorry.
He's coming through for me.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
So, yeah, there was always this tension between should it be in the film because it's telling story and you want to feel some like emotional impact from the characters and tell the story of each character, or should it just not be there because we want it to be super functional and not be annoying, especially?
Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of question about like how much emotional communication the agent should do. I mean, obviously we could just think of it as just basically an icon that you just look at to target and then speak. But having some kind of emotional capacity seemed very important, not just for this film because it was a dramatic story, but also in Wall. When we made Wall, we looked at different voices that have different kind of characteristics, and the one that we ended up going with wasn't the one that had the best fidelity, that sounded the realist. It was actually the one that had the most emotional range and was able to plug into when Wall gets angry and you ask him like too much or say horrible things, Wall will sound angry, and for some reason it just became much more satisfying as an interaction. It's great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this idea of like how much of those sounds, getting the balance right between how much is enough to kind of enliven the world and how much would be too much and would be overwhelming. So I guess, you have to start to think, if this was a real scenario, all of those agents ideally would know how many of them there are and be able to like dial down the way that they're responding to kind of allow for the fact that they're in a crowd or something. Yeah. I think it's, I think sound will be a kind of major part of this. It's, we're very lucky to have these very clever and considerate sound designers working with us.
I love Glitchy's theme as well, the music that plays at the beginning and end. It's a beautiful piece. Like, we have lots of amazing music, and like the Hyperreality soundtrack, I think, was like out for a little while on Bandcamp somewhere that you could find it, and I love listening to those ones still as well. Yeah, it's great.
Cool. This was such a different challenge from Hyperreality, where the thing was to be as annoying as possible.
Yeah.
For this dystopian warning, and then this film is more hopeful and trying to be useful and functional, and approaching it more like a sonic branding job.
Yeah. Creating
UI sounds for their intended use.
It's very interesting.
That actually ties into one of the questions from the audience, if that's...
Which one?
Someone asked about
one earlier.
moving from hyperreality to...
It was earlier, if you scroll back up. I don't know. Yeah, there.
Why didn't you read it out?
Me?
Emily, maybe?
Oh, sure. I can read out questions. Okay, so while hyperreality, which I think can be considered a spiritual predecessor to Agents, showed a more pessimistic view of the future, like you mentioned, Agents takes a more neutral stance, leaning towards wholesomely optimistic. What was the reason for this change in tone, and how have your views on emerging technologies changed over time?
I guess it's me, I guess. Yeah, well, I think I was saying it earlier that, when I would make my first AR films, I think the first one came out in the end of 2009, beginning of 2010, Hyperreality 2016. It was that age of like real technical optimism. It was like technology's going to save us. We can just sort of put everything into that hope that it's going to all pan out okay, because there are so many amazing advances coming that everything's going to be okay. And I kind of felt that it was very interesting to understand like the possibilities of those things, but I didn't see it as a straight like, oh yeah, this is just going to be a kind of magic pill for everything. I saw that there are lots of other things that are happening at the moment, these kind of weak signals of how how it kind of turns basically space everything into kind of a surface for media consumption and surveillance. I thought that was very problematic, and people were not really thinking about it. But now in 2023, it's a very different type of space. I feel like we've almost kind of flipped the other side entirely, and everybody is really, really down on technology, especially the advances in AI are incredible, and some people are very excited about it. But I think there's probably an equal amount of people, maybe more people, who are terrified of it, and they're terrified because they don't know. Well, I guess there's a threat to jobs. They're worried that there won't be a place for them, that there'll be an agent that can replace them. But also, AI is kind of an unknowable thing, right? It exists as kind of this sort of ominous presence that hangs over the world at the moment. And I feel like one of the functions we can take as designers is to try and connect the possibilities of technology with how we want to live our lives. So I guess agents is kind of a stab at thinking about if there's a different way that we can imagine our interaction with AI, which is much more human and much less about big organizations controlling everything, and much more about giving AI to people to be able to make their own agents and do what they want. So, I think like a lot of that shift is from that. I mean, obviously as well, we're working with Niantic, and Niantic don't want us to make a completely dystopian view that makes everyone, makes us want to like burn all of their technology in the fire. But I think it worked together.
But Niantic also as a company, I mean, Gabriel, you can correct me if this isn't accurate view, but like in every conversation that I feel like we've had with anyone from Niantic, they have this sort of attitude of like, how can this be good for people? How can this like make people happier and healthier and more adventurous and connect together? And it's it's a really great mission, and like exploring how technology can achieve those goals is super interesting.
I was just reading the comment from Rafa in the chat, which I think kind of dovetails with that as well, talking about the SAG-AFTRA strike. Is that how you say it? SAG-AFTRA?
SAG-AFTRA,
yeah. I love the perspective this highlights of how XR and AI can fuel creativity, but how easily in the wrong hands it becomes more about how much the technology can do. Do XR developers and research scientists need to be active in the discussion about the dangers of the technology for creative autonomy? How do these perspectives influence your own dev research work, or whoever wants to answer? Or anyone would like to answer that one? Maybe one for you, Gabe?
Well, I would say this is all quite fitting. There's a Copilot, it has been released for people who are developers, not to replace them, but so that they can be better developers and create newer, cooler, faster, better things. This notion of being enhanced by the technology. I think when people said, getting on the internet, I got on the internet today and I did this thing, people were scared of what's going to happen and all the dark corners that would form because of the internet. And we have learned that there are dark corners, but there are also great opportunities. And we don't talk about getting on the internet now, it's just become part of our lives. But with new AIs, and I love this notion, I absolutely love this notion of agents. I think this is an opportunity for regular people to have some superpowers, right? To have the agents, have the AI working for them, looking out for them. Are you sure you want to send that email? Maybe you should cool off before you say something that's going to be hard to take back. Are you sure you want to order that thing to arrive on a day when maybe you're not in? You can have agents that are helping you, whether you're just busy and absent-minded, or whether as we get older and our eyesight starts to go and we need a little bit of assistance. So I love this notion of making technology work for us, and it actually gives me a lot of comfort in an era where people are talking about being replaced by AI.
I think, can I jump in as the concept artist whose jobs are being stolen by AI?
Yeah, please. That sounds,
I think I am sort of terrified about it, but I think that, also, even in this film, I kind of did my first attempt at like, okay, how can I work with some of this, some of these tools to kind of make, come up with a creative solution which is not how I would have done it before these tools existed. So I don't know if you have the slides. You have the slides with the stable diffusion and the control.
Oh yeah, that was a very interesting process.
So for Glitchy's creations, we did a really interesting process that was pioneered by Rafe in our studio. I think I saw Rafe. Maybe he's here, maybe he's gone. Which was around kind of putting in a kind of basic grey clay style model into stable diffusion with control net, and then getting it to redraw in different styles. So these were some of our sort of the early tests that Rafe did, and then using those ideas, I made a load of models on Gravity Sketch, which were much more sort of free form and floating. So we went from these kind of like block out kind of grey models to these grey models that were these kind of like fragmented. It wanted it to feel like Glitchy's very creative, but can't quite like get it together, and so there are all these bits of ideas that are kind of floating. So I made it all in Gravity Sketch, and then did these passes, put it in Blender, did the passes, put it out into Stable Diffusion, and then did these all, and it just made these amazing images. And it's not really anything that I would have done before if I was just painting in Photoshop and having to get everything out of my head.
I think at the moment it probably would have been nicer if you'd just done it in Photoshop.
but it felt like in the
yeah,
spirit of this, it was really interesting to give it a try.
We're getting towards the end of our hour. It's flown by, but I don't want to kick everybody out. So no one will be offended if anyone wants to leave. But I think if Gabe, I don't know how your time is, and Yumika, Tom, Joe, but if you want to go for another, anyone else have any questions or wants to ask any questions in the chat, please just request. What did you do?
Request to speak. You just click on a little hand waving at the bottom.
There's a few more questions in the chat that are
Also, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
so at the top, Nick.
So the question from Nick earlier about the one scene that really reminded him of your Gods paper.
Yeah,
and that was a bit earlier there. And yeah.
Should I go up and read
Nick,
that?
would you like to come on stage and you can ask your question live? Yeah, you do. Okay, good.
Okay, I got it. Hey, Nick.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, so congratulations, everyone. It's really cool to see. It was really great to see sort of like the thoughts that you had in this paper about sort of animism and AI sort of translated into a real story that everyone can kind of, I think everyone is understanding it now in the same way. So it's really cool to see that. But I'm curious, like, how your thoughts have changed since you wrote that, maybe, or you started to read some of the research around that you were quoting in that paper. And like, I sort of want to sign on, like, how can I help convince people that this is a better way, Because I think for me, it really fits my idea of like city life and what makes city life so great. And I think there is a risk of like technology sort of homogenizing city life and ruining some complexity. So, what do you think? Like, do we need to set up a institution or a initiative to promote this some way?
Well, I mean, my hope, I guess, for the film is that it becomes this way for people to be able to like crystallize an idea of like something that could be built, and if people want to build it, then it becomes this kind of touch point people can come back to. Obviously, we built Wall. We're interested in building more agents, and so we're kind of active in this space as well. And I guess one of the point of hosting it on our Discord is the hope that maybe people who are interested in these ideas might kind of stick around and share their work, share their progress, share any interesting links and things that they know about. So, yeah, I don't know where the conversation is happening around this stuff, but I think we would love to connect to it as well. So, we can use this Discord for sure as a place to be able to talk about things. In terms of how things have changed since 2017, I mean, everything has just, it's kind of like with hyperreality back in 2016 that like a lot of the stuff didn't really exist at that point. It kind of sort of existed in research labs, but then now it has become really mainstream and kind of started to become even affordable, and even sometimes in some cases it's even good. But it feels like we're a little bit like earlier on in the curve with a lot of this these like embodied agents, but the curve is much faster. Like it seems to be kind of appearing very quickly. So yeah, I feel like we didn't exactly rush to get it out. We could have pushed it out probably earlier in the year, but it did feel like appropriate to release it now. And I feel like if we release it like at the end of the year, it's going to be, we wouldn't actually make a film anymore. We'd just make the thing.
Yeah. You can no longer spend 8 years on a graphic novel about.
Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of
track very quickly.
Yeah, a lot of the examples of things that people bring up or ideas people have, a lot of them relate back to science fiction books that were written in the 60s and 70s. So I feel like there is kind of there are like broader themes that like ideas that kind of stick around for a long time, and there might be kind of iteration within that and some changes, but people are still kind of committed to the larger idea.
Okay, and then we had Jimmy who asked the question. Jimmy, if you want to raise your hand, you can come speak. If not, in 5 seconds, I'll read your question out loud.
Agostino's gone to see Kraftwerk.
Yeah, so it was there, but not anymore. Okay, I'll read it out then. So, he said there is a scene when one of the agents is recommending other coffee shops on the way, saying there are better ones, etc. But we then find out this was a match coffee date, which implies that there are layers of privacy between different agents. One presumably knows it's a date, having involved setting it up. And the human in the loop, was that an intentional message you wanted to communicate as part of the brief? And do you think this is a future use case for AI agents in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually really happy you picked up on this. This is like the last thing that went into the film, this like permissions updated label. I was very interested that like this local guide has kind of come in, and you see it's like holding hands with Nav here. So Nav is like Maya's agent, and then it kind of comes in and sort of makes this connection and starts speaking. So I guess I wanted to sort of think about the idea that you could visualize how information is passing from one agent to another, and the permissions that agent has to act in your world. So in this case, some kind of unguided permission thing has happened, and this local guide has managed to connect to Nav and figure out where Nav is taking Maya. But as a kind of a safeguard, I guess, against people doing that unintentionally, they hold hands when they're connecting information. I don't know if this is the way that it will be done, but it's like a way that you can kind of start to put these kind of controls that are usually hidden behind menus, and you have to scroll around and find the setting. We can actually make that into more of like a social connection. So in this case, by pulling them apart and separating them physically, you're actually removing the permission for those agents to speak to each other. So I was trying to think about, as we go forward, and especially into this like multiplayer, would you say? Like multi-user, multi-agent like environment, which basically spans the whole world. That kind of privacy and permissions is a huge problem, like a huge UX problem. But we're very good at that as human beings. We can kind of see when people are cozying up to each other, and we might not be able to like separate them, and put them together in social groups, but remove the one that you don't trust. And I think, try and map those kind of permissions onto human relationships or human type style relationships is maybe an interesting way to kind of approach that.
It's super nice this way that actually a really quick kind of embodied gesture can take the place of going through a whole load of kind of settings on screen.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just reading through Gabe's comments. It's great. So we'll bring a very different perspective. Maya's hand gestures outdoors, but likely outside the field of view of the headset's camera.
I don't know how Gabe knows the specs of the
Did you
headset.
see it? It's made of cameras. The whole thing's a camera.
Actually, the whole city is full of cameras. Right? So it's not even from her. It's not from her headset. It's
Okay, so we can either answer Agostino's questions, even though it's gone, or there's a new one that just came in. Specifically, does Liquidity/Niantic offer any specific tools/frameworks you could recommend for devs to streamline the creation of this kind of experiences?
Oh, great. Well, obviously you should check out 8th Wall for the creation of very easy to access experiences that you can just go onto the website and you get to speak to them immediately. InWorld, the system we use for creating the brain, is extremely user-friendly. You can just go into inworld.ai, make your own agent, speak to other agents. It's really fun to create them. You can make them about anything. There are some really good examples on the InWorld site. I would recommend the Private Detective. I enjoyed a lot. And
as Dilly McMu was saying, Lightship,
Yes,
real world meshing, and
DPS as well,
DPS.
which is part of 8th Wall as well, but allows you to be able to put located agents. So, for example, I guess an agent that might be tied to your record player, or might be living in a particular location, like the local guide. You would be able to basically, from seeing that, from looking through the camera, you would be able to place that agent in that scene and not have it appear in other places.
semantic understanding.
Very nice. Yeah, semantic understanding as well. So like all of these tools are very good. See, company man. Very good. So I think there's lots of tools out there now, and of course, almost seems like every day there are new things coming out. So it's definitely a period where there's lots of innovation and experimentation happening, and a lot of the work of developing the experiences is about how you fit those things together. So I think Wall as a project was very interesting because it brought together like a platform that does the brain, a platform that does how you serve it up to in AR, and then trying to build kind of custom pieces to link all those things together. But I think as time goes on, it's going to get easier and easier to do that, and hopefully at some point we'll start to see these kind of like ecosystem models emerging. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Do you want to answer Agostino's questions for whoever's around though?
Or maybe we can have, I don't know if Tom, Joe, Yumika, or even, or Dave as well, if you had any other things you wanted to say before we wrap up.
Can't think of anything in particular.
Well, I got one for Yumika maybe. Oh, sorry. Tom.
Sorry, just a very quick comment. I see from gratitude questions, but not only, other people I've spoken with. Kiichi, are you planning to do some kind of behind the scenes, some kind of explanation? Because I think people are interested in either knowing how the movie itself was made, or knowing more about a little bit of education, like how they could get started in this space.
Yeah, that's great. We've actually got a few blog posts that are coming out soon. So next week, I believe we've got, I've just done a blog post and we've got a comment from John Hankey from Niantic, the CEO of Niantic, is I think writing something about it as well. So we'll have just a bit that talks about some of the themes of agents. We've also got a couple more blog posts coming up about how we made Wall. So if you actually wanted to go and create a real, not a film, but a real agent, then there'll be quite a detailed walkthrough, I think, both on the 8th Wall side about the kind of features that we used that made that possible, as well as the kind of combination of how AI and XR can be combined through using InWorld and 8th Wall together. So we've got those two coming out in the next few weeks, and the best place to find them is either following us, I guess, on social media. We'll post all of our links in here, or hopefully they'll come onto your feed somehow in a way. I don't know how it works.
I guess just to answer Gratitude's question very specifically, the brain agent structures is in-world. Semantic understanding comes from Niantic's Lightship SDK, and the locations as well. And then 8th Wall allows it all to be WebXR rather than you having to make an app and get people to download it.
Great, okay. So thanks very much, everybody. It's great. It was really nice to be able to chat about it. I think we were just going to throw it online, but then thought, well, maybe we can make a bit more about it. So we split it into episodes and have this thing. So I really thank you very much for coming, everybody. And I hope you will stick around in the Liquid City Network server. I think everybody here is really interested in AR, AI, so we'll really appreciate any links or discussion. I think we'll find interesting people here. And then I guess finally, if you're around in London or in the UK, from next Saturday, we're having our Overbeast launch, King's Cross, Saturday 23rd from 6 o'clock. You can just turn up, but we'll also put details in the Liquid City Discord as well, so you'll be able to find it here as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you to all of our amazing panelists, or I guess, creators of the film. Thank you very, very much for coming, and see you around. Bye. Bye.